How you doing there? Well, Cheveh, I have big news. For me, it's a big deal. I don't know, maybe for other people it's not. For me, it's a really big deal. I just sewed a button onto my pants. Again, maybe it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. I mean, I almost lost these pants. The button fell off. What are you going to do? I just totally sewed them back on. I think I did a decent job. Watch it for YouTube videos. No. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't sound like a big deal. Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Aleph, Daf 91 of Masechta BavaMetzia. Friends, your friends. What are we talking today? Let's see. Chasma b'kol. Okay, yeah, okay, sure. What's it called? Losachsom shor b'disho, and yeah, that kind of stuff. But yeah, BavaMetzia, it's the best. So okay, here we go. All right, we're gonna start Daf Tzadi Amud Beis. Yeah, there's great stuff on this daf. There's great stuff in every daf. All right. Tzadi Amud Beis, about 5 lines from the bottom. 5 lines from the bottom. Itmar, it was stated. Chosma b'kol v'niga b'kol. All right. So if you muzzle a ox or an animal with your voice, how do you muzzle an animal with your voice? Well, every time it goes down to eat something, you scare it. So it never gets a second. Every time it goes down to chaparan, so you kind of like yell at it, and then it doesn't eat. Or v'niga b'kol, or if you have like a shor v'chomer. Right? If you have like 2 different animals that you can't pull a cart with 2 different animals, that's kilaim. That's a form of kilaim. So what if you don't actually pull them? What if you just say like, hey, go, come on now. And you start clapping and dancing a little bit, and then they start moving. So, bikol, I guess, clapping and dancing might, but you say like, hey guys, let's go. Okay? So if you effectively muzzle an animal or, lead kilaim animals with your voice. So Rabbi Yechanan Amar Chayiv v'Shlokish Amar Potter. So Rabbi Yechanan says Chayiv, okay, and Rish Lakish says Potter. Okay, Rabbi Yechanan Amar Chayiv, Rabbi Yechanan says Chayiv, Akimas Piv Havya Maise, because the moving of his mouth when he's saying, hey, come on, let's go. So his lips move, and that's a Maise. It's an action. Rish Lakish Amar Potter, Kala lo yave Maise. Rish Lakish says Potter because a voice is not an action, and live she'ein bo Maise ein loken alav is the assumption, right? The lav that doesn't have an action, you would not be violating that lav. You would not be chayiv makis. Okay. So, okay, gewaldig. So Rabbi Yechanan says Chayiv because Akimas Piv Havya Maise. Rish Lakish says Potter because Kala Lo Havya Maise. Fine. Eis Rabbi Yechanan to Rish Lakish. So Rabbi Yechanan asks a kasha to Rish Lakish to prove that Kala is Le Maise, that Akimas Piv Havya Maise. That what is this? Maybe the first Mishnah in Tamura or something. Chaver, we're going to get to Tamura. We're going to get to every Masechta in Shas. Chaver, don't worry. Lo she'adam rasha lo hamir, ela she'im heimir mummer. So I think maybe it's the first Mishnah in Tamura. So it says, if you look at Rashi, Lo sha'adam Rashi lohamir, the first Rashi on the daf, Reishat Masisa hakol memirin, echad anoshim ve'echad anoshim, that everybody can be memir, can do Tamura, right? You're not allowed to swap one animal for another, right? So it said, right, if you have an animal that's a korban, so you can't swap it out for a different animal instead. So that's called Tamura. So hakol memirin, everybody can do Tamura. So we're saying Lo sha'ad, it says the Gemara, Lo sha'adam Rashi le'emir. It's not saying that everybody's able to do Tamura in that it's mutter and that they're allowed to. No, it's that anybody ella she'im heimir mummer. No, meaning anybody is capable of being over on the lav of Tamura, of Lo yachlifenu. And they get makis. So we see about Tamura, when you say, okay, I'm going to use this one instead, so you're just speaking, and we're saying that you're chayiv. So we see that akimas piv havya maise must be a maise, which is why you can get a makis for it. On my lay, so Rish Lakish says, meh. Hamani, who's the author of that Mishnah? Rabbi Yehuda, The author of that Mishnah is Reb Yehuda the Amar, who holds Lav she'ein bo maise lokin alav. Reb Yehuda Taka holds that a lav she'ein bo maise, a lav that you didn't do anything, doesn't have an action, such as this, argues Rish Lakish, where he's just saying something, says Reb Yehuda says that's enough to get makis. Okay? And that Mishnah is Reb Yehuda. But the Chachamim, says Rish Lakish, would argue that lav she'ein bo maise ein lokin alav. Fine. But can you really explain that this Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Katani Reisha? But the Reisha of the Mishnah, as Rashi had pointed out, says Hakol Mimirin Echad Anoshim Ve'echad Anoshim, that anybody can do Tamura, could be over on Tamura, whether men, whether women. V'avinam we ask Hakol Lasuyimai, when it says Hakol Mimirin, everybody. So who else is included when we say everybody, including who? Lasuye Yoresh, that it includes even a Yoresh, that if somebody inherits a korban from his father, so then he would also be over on Tamura if he swaps it out for a different animal. Udelo Rabbi Yehuda, but that's not like Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda Amar Yoresh Eino Meimir, Yoresh Eino Somech. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, though, is that an inheritor, an heir, would not violate Tamura. And an heir would not do smicha on a korban, his father's korban. So we can't say that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, because when it says Hakol Memirin, and Hakol is to include even a Yorish, but Rabbi Yehuda says that a Yorish is not Memir. So it can't be Rabbi Yehuda. So Haitana Sover la Kavosi Bechada Ufalig Ole Bechada. We could say, well, the Tana of this Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yehuda with regard to the fact that Lav She'ein Bo Maaseh Lokan Olav, but does not hold like Rabbi Yehuda to the extent that the Tana of the Mishnah says that a Yoresh is able to be Memir, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says that a Yoresh is not Memir. So the Tana of that Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yehuda vis-a-vis Lav She'ein Bo Maaseh Lokan Olav, but does not hold like Rabbi Yehuda vis-a-vis a Yoresh being Memir. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Hachosim esapore. Okay, somebody who muzzles a cow, v'dashba, and threshes with the cow, loke u mishalim, gets makis for violating losachsum shorbedisho, and he also has to pay. Pay who? Well, it's talking about a scenario where Shimon rented out his cow to Reuven. Now the thing is, Shimon assumed, and can assume, that, well, when Reuven's threshing with his cow will be unmuzzled, will not be muzzled, because that would be a violation of the Sachsum Shorbedisho. So therefore, Shimon factors in that he's not going to have to feed his cow today, because his cow is working Reuven's field today. So therefore, Shimon's not going to have to pay for food. And therefore, he kind of, factors that into his cheshbon, maybe the rental or whatever it is. But Shimon wouldn't be paying for food that day, because his cow is going to eat while he's threshing. Now, when Reuven ends up muzzling the cow, not only is he over on the lav of l'sachsim shorbedisho, but also he's causing Shimon a loss of money, because now Shimon has to pay for food for the cow, because the cow couldn't eat while it was threshing. So Tana Rabbanan achosim esapore. So if Reuven muzzles the cow, Vidashba, and he threshes with it, loke, so he gets makis for losachsim shorbedisho, umishalim, and he also has to pay back Shimon for the fact that he didn't feed the cow, that the cow couldn't eat. Daled kabin lepar, and that would be 4 calves worth, I guess, of, wheat or whatever he's threshing, for a cow. The gimel kabin lechomer, and it would be 3 calves for a donkey. Va'enu loke umeitz va'enu loke umishalim befrekte gemara. I thought that as a rule, you don't get 2 punishments. You wouldn't get makis and also misa. Meaning, if you chayiv misa, then you wouldn't get makis. And if you chayiv makis, you wouldn't also have to pay. You get the more severe punishment, and that's it. You don't have 2 punishments. So Abaye Amani, Reb Meir the Amar Loko Mishalim. So Abaye says that, well, this is the opinion of Reb Meir, who says that take Loko Mishalim. That take, you can get makis and also have to pay. Reb Meir says that Yutaka can have both makis and a payment. Ravi Omar, So Rava gives an interesting answer. The Agos Abach adds some extra words which I think are good. Lotzes Yidei Shamayim. Well, if he wants to be Yotze's obligation to heaven, Esnon Osra Torah Vafilu Ba'al Imo, that Esnon Zona is Osr to offer as a korban, even if one sleeps with his mother. What does that mean? It means that if one sleeps with his mother, so he's Chayiv Misa. It's one of the arayas. Now, if she comes to court and says, hey, he owes me money because he needs to pay me for that, so the court can't make him pay because he's Chayiv Misa. So therefore, meaning if you assume that Eino Mesu Mishalim, well, he's Chayiv Misa, so they're not going to say you have to pay your mother for that. But here's the thing. If he does pay his mother nonetheless, it is still considered Esnan Zona. What does that mean? Well, it means that he still has an obligation to pay. That's the interesting thing. Meaning, if we say that since he's Chayiv Misa, so then he's only Chayiv Misa and he Bechlal has no obligation for money anymore, well then when he gives her, let's say the sheep or whatever, so it would be a gift, it wouldn't be a payment. And then Afkamina it wouldn't be Esnan Zona. Esnan Zona is payment for a harlot, cannot be offered in the Beis HaMikdash. But we're saying that even though he's Chayiv Misa, if he does pay her with a sheep or something, it would be Esnan Zona, and it would be not be able to be offered as a korban, which means that even though he's Chayiv Misa, if he pays her, it's still considered a payment. And what does Rava conclude from there? What he concludes from there is that the payment still, the obligation, the debt still remains. Now, Bezdin can't force the child in this case to pay it because he's Chayiv Misa. They can only be enforced Misa. They can't be enforced Misa and Mammon, assuming not like Reb Meir. But that doesn't mean that the debt is canceled. The debt is not canceled. It just can't be enforced. And so therefore, vis-a-vis Hashem, I mean, you still, if you owe somebody money, you owe somebody money, even if you're Chayiv Misa. So how does this apply here? It applies here because we're saying that by we said that if Reuven muzzles Shimon's ox, he's renting Shimon's ox and he muzzles the ox, so he's Chayiv Makis for Losasam Shobadisho, but he also has to pay Shimon for the fact that now Shimon has to pay for the food. So what Rav is saying, look, it's true, we can't enforce Reuven to pay Shimon because he's Chayiv Makis and Ein Loke Umishalim. So if we're going to give him Makis, we can't enforce him that he has to pay back, that he has to pay Shimon, but that doesn't mean that the debt is canceled. And says Rav that if Reuven wants to sort of pay back his debt, which we can't force him to pay, but the debt still stands, and he wants to clear that debt, well then he would pay Shimon. If Reuven wants to clear that debt, he'll pay Shimon. Right, so again, so Rava Omer says Rava Esnon Osir Torah Vafil Ba'alimo, that the Torah says that Esnon Zona is also even if somebody sleeps with his mother, where we can't force him to pay it, but if he does pay it, it's not considered a gift, it's considered payment, and it's Esnon Zona, which means that the chiyuv of the debt still stands. Rav Papa Omer says Rav Papa Mishas Mishicha Ichayev La Bimzono Sel. Says Rav Papa that So Rav Papa explains why is he Chayev Makis and also have to pay, because they're two separate things. Because from the time that Reuven, pulled the ox, so at that point he was already responsible to pay for its food. So it's at that point that the chiyuv of mizonis kicks in. Umilka lo laki ad shas chasima, but the lav that he'd be chayiv makis for is only once he starts threshing with a muzzled ox. That's when there is a chayiv makis. So the chayiv makis and the chayiv mammon are not coming at the same time; they're coming separately, and therefore he can be chayiv for both of them separately. And yes, we can enforce that he both has to get makis and he has to pay because they're from two separate inyanim. Okay. Rav Papa says, Rav Papa ane mile, these things, ba'u minoi devei Rav Papa bar Abba, these things they inquired of me by the Beis HaMedrash of Rav Papa bar Abba, ufashti luli isura, and they asked me two kashas, and I answered both of them, saying that they're usur in both cases. One of them I said it's asur because it is asur. The other one I said it's asur even though technically it isn't. The first question that they asked me is, can you knead a dough with milk? Can you make a dairy bread? The answer is you can't. I said nisht. And that's takad halacha. The Tanis we learn in the Brisa. We don't knead a dough in milk and make a dairy broit. V'imlosh kol paskula asura. And if you did make a dairy bread, the entire bread is forbidden. Mipnei hergel avera, because it's risky, right? You make a dairy bread, somebody's going to put flesh on it, right? You make dairy hamburger bun, and somebody puts a hamburger in it. Chaval. So therefore you're not allowed to make a dairy bread. Kayotzibo, similarly, ein toshin es atonur ba'aliyah. Don't take the aliyah is like the fatty tail of like a sheep or something, which is mutter. It's not chaylev or anything, but it's flesh, but it's meat. So don't grease the oven with the fat of the aliyah because it's meat. Vimtosh, and if you did grease the oven with the aliyah, kol paskula asura, the entire bread is asura. Ad sheyasik es atanur, all breads that are made in the oven are going to be asura until you burn out the oven to kind of remove any meatiness from it. So because for the same reason, right? If you have bread that's fleishiks, so then you might eat it with make a grilled cheese sandwich, and that would be also not good. Okay, that was question number one. Right? They asked me about dairy bread. I said no, and that's taka da halacha. Ve'idoch taka in the under shaila, in the second shaila. But they asked me, ma lahachnis min v'sheinu mino lodir. Can you put two different species of animals together in a enclosure? Let's say a cow and a donkey. Can you put them together, right? A female cow and a male donkey. So can you put them together? Because the concern is, well, they might make it might be kilayim, but they might have a baby together. Is that possible? I don't know, maybe two things that are able to have babies together. Okay, and I said osir. You can't do it. You can't put a cow and a donkey together in an enclosure and leave them. And that's not taka da halacha l'maisa. The Amar Shmuel, because after all, Shmuel says minaifim ad shiru kederech minaifim. Okay, so when it comes to if people witness a forbidden relationship happening, okay, so a man and a woman who are not allowed, it's a erva, it's a rice, they're not allowed to be sleeping together, and you see them sleeping together. So what exactly do you have to see in order to be able to testify that this is what happened? So what you have to see is that it looks like what it looks like. That's enough. You don't have to see penetration. You don't have to get all in there and say I saw everything, right? It says kederech hamenaifim. If you know what you saw, you say I saw what was going on. I know what that was. That is enough. Uvichilayim, but that's not the case when it comes to kilayim. So, for example, in order to be, but I guess to testify about kilayim. Wait 1 second. Yeah. What does that say? Okay. I think it sounds like from interesting, because Rashi, when it says b'manayif, and it says me'idim aleim ha'edim l'chayv miso malchus mishe yishkivu. Wait. Yeah. Okay. Beseder. Right. I mean that. Right. Right. So meaning when it comes to like a man and a woman, I guess. Meaning the point is that they aren't, meaning the witnesses by people, all they're doing is testifying that okay, we know what we saw and that's enough. There isn't actually any proof that they actually had bia, right? It's just the proof, the testimony is that, this is what we saw and that's enough. But when it comes to kilayim, so what would have to happen is I don't. I get. If you have a donkey and a cow, let's say, you would have to get all in there. You would have to. You'd only be chayiv if, like, for kilayim, if you kind of take the donkey's, shove it in. You got to get all in there. You got to stick it in there, and like with your hand, you got to do it for them. So that's when you chayiv. So that being the case, that being the case, gewaldig. So that being the case, so Rav Papa had said that, you're not allowed to leave a donkey and a cow together in the same enclosure. But the truth is, when it comes to kilayim, you're only chayiv if your mamish facilitate it. So just putting them in an enclosure, technically, is not actually asur, but nonetheless, he ruled that it's asur. Mosiv Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami, but Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami taka asked a kasha. Really, is that so that you're only chayiv, like, only if you mamish facilitate it, but otherwise you would be potter? Ilu nemar, the Brisa says, Ilu nemar behem tcholo sarbia. If the pasuk, right, the pasuk says behem tcholo sarbia kilayim. Right, don't have your animals do kilayim. But if it would have just said behem tcholo sarbia, do not, mate your animals. Hayisi Omer, I would say lo yechoz odma behema b'shasha ola aleh zachar. Remember, it didn't say kilayim yet. Right? If it just said behem tcholo sarbia, your animals you shall not, mate. So Hayisi Omer, I would say lo yechoz odma behema b'shasha ola aleh zachar. So meaning, if you have like an ewe and a ram, right, two different kinds, a boy sheep and a girl sheep. So you have an ewe and a ram. I know, Hillel. I know. I'm saying it wrong. You'd have an ewe and a ram, and so if it said behem tcholo sarbia, so I would say that you can't hold the ewe in place. Meaning, just like if the ram is like mounting the ewe, you can't hold the ewe in place. Tamloma kilayim, therefore it says kilayim. Meaning that you can do that by an ewe and a ram, but not by a cow and a donkey. So lab michlal, does that not imply the kilayim achiza nami lo? So meaning we had said that kilayim, you're only chayiv like when you mamish get all up in there and you facilitate it hands on. But this seems to be implying that you would even be chayiv by kilayim just by like holding the cow in place and not letting it move and facilitating in that way, but not as hands-on like that. So my achiza, we say, no, what does it mean? Achiza? Achiza means achnosa. No, it means getting all up in there, facilitating it hands-on. So why do we call it achiza if it's not clear? Lishnamaya, because we don't want to get clear. Getting clear is TMI. So therefore they wanted to avoid TMI. But as I've said in the past, they try to avoid TMI, so now they need me to explain it for them. I mean, there's no shortcuts. Very nice. You want to be TMI, so now what? I have to sit here explaining it. But all right, someone's got to explain it eventually, ultimately. Amar Yehuda says, Yehuda, min b'mino mutar la'achnis ki mekachol b'shvaferes. Okay, so when it comes to min b'mino, right? So if you're breeding like an ewe and a ram, and you want to make like a baby sheep. So mutter, it's mutter lahachnis ki mekachol b'shvaferes. It's mutter to like mamish get all up in there and facilitate it hands on. Facilitate the mounting of the ram in the ewe. V'afilu mishum pritzus aleka, and there's no concern about maybe it's inappropriate. My time I'll come back because it's a job. You're doing it as a job. You're busy working on your job. You're not thinking about inappropriate things. Mosiv Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami, Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami asks a kasha. Ilu nemar, that if the pasuk would have said be'emtecha lo sar bia, if the pasuk, wait, what is this? Sorry, 1 second. Anyways, sorry, I got a little distracted there. Right, because I have whatever. Where am I? Wait, what am I doing here? Is this on? Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm like all over the place. Okay. If it said be'em tchalo sabia, well, hayisi I would say lo yechos adam esa behema Or mean, don't hold the u in place that the ram can mount it. Therefore it says kilayim. Kilayim hu de asr. So we're saying, okay, so by kilayim it's asr to hold the u in place. Hamin bimino shari. But by min bimino, so if it's like a ram and an u, for example, it would be permitted to hold it in place, right? So meaning by kilayim you can't hold the, like the cow in place with the donkey, but by a ram and an u, you'd be able to hold the u in place. But umin b'mino nami achiza in achnasalo. But the implication is that by a ram and an u, holding it in place is okay, but not mamish hands on. So my achiza achnasa, my karle achiza lishnamaya. Well, achiza is really achnasa. It's really hands on. Why does it say achiza, holding it in place? Sounds a little bit unclear, because we want it to be cleaner rather than dirtier. Amr Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi, Amilsa bo minoi devei Reb Nechemia, they asked me the following by the Besmeshit of Reb Nechemia, Reish Galusa ma'u lahachniz min umino v'she'eno mino l'dir. Would the Reish Galusa be permitted to put into a enclosure, I guess like, let's say, an ewe and a ram and a, dog? Okay, so Kevin the Ika Mina Basar Mina Gorer. Do we say, well, since there's an ewe and there's a ram, so the ewe and the ram are going to kind of stick to each other, they're going to keep the dog away. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps Afilu Achi Lo, or perhaps we say, even so, even though there's an ewe and a ram, still we're concerned about the dog. Mufashilu, I answered them the Yisur, I said it's also Dilo Kiilchasa, which isn't actually the halacha, as we said earlier, because technically you can technically put them into an enclosure together. The issue is mamish, getting hands on over there. Mishum pitzusa de avde, because the avodim are around, and who knows what they'll do, and therefore those avodim they might end up mating them, and that wouldn't be okay. Okay. Haya ose biyadov. If you have a person, okay, so back to people. So you have people working, right? New Mishnah. You have people working the field, okay. While they're working the field, they're allowed to eat. So if he's working biyadav with his hands, but not with his feet, it's just work that involves hands. Or if it's work that just involves feet but not hands. Even if he was just using his shoulders, he can eat. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, that no, in order to be able to eat, he has to use his hands and his legs. My timer, how come? Says the Gemara, how come? How come the Tanna Kama says that even just using your hands or your feet or even your shoulders is enough? Well, all the pasuk says is if you go into your friend's vineyard, so whatever you're doing there, just your hands, just your feet, whatever it is, it's fine. That no, you have to use your hands and your feet. My time at Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says that kishor, because he treats it like an ox. Mashor just like an ox uses its hands and its legs. So we also by a poil, so he has to use his hands and his feet. What if you thresh with geese and chickens? Now geese and chickens don't have hands, they only have feet. What do we say? Do we say, well, it's about using all of your koiches, and they're using all their koiches. All their koiches is their legs, they don't have hands, so using everything that they got. Or perhaps or perhaps no, we mamish need hands and feet, and they don't have hands, they only have feet. Teku, ich weiß nicht. Omar Rav Nachman Rav Barvua Pe'alim ad sheli hilchu shesi ve'orei begas. Okay, so if you have workers, and what they do, they're hired to trample on grapes. That's what they're doing. They're going to trample all over the grapes in order to extract the juice. So until they walk in the trampling zone to like north south as well as east west, like in both directions. I was just sewing. Do you know how to? I know how to sew. Do you know how to sew? It's like sewing a button. When you sew a button, So first you sow in one direction back and forth, and then you sow in the other direction. There's 4 holes in a button, and you start at like the northwest one, and you go to the southeast one, and you do that a few times, and then you go to like the southwest one, and you go to the northeast one, and you do that a few times, and then you do a few other little tricks, but I won't bore you with the details. It's very complicated, but okay, Shesiva Ariv, Shesiva Erev, sewing. Okay. It's a good thing that I sewed on a button right before I learned Daf Tzadi Aleph in Masechta BavaMetzia. Shesiva Erev. So you got to walk northeast and north south and east west and okay. So until they go kind of in both directions, right, north south as well as east west, I don't know how else to explain it. Kind of like sewing, so until then, they can only eat the grapes, but they wouldn't yet be able to eat the wine because the wine wouldn't be recognizable yet. But once they've walked in both directions, so then they can eat the grapes and also drink the wine once it's noticeable. Because as we're about to learn in the upcoming Mishnah, if you're eating grapes, if you're harvesting grapes, you can't be eating figs that are in the next row. You can't eat from 2 sides. If you're harvesting grapes, you eat grapes, not figs. So here also, if you're crushing grapes, you can't be drinking wine. It would be considered like a separate thing. But once you go Shesiva Erev, so then the wine's recognizable, the grapes are recognizable, and you can consume from both. Says the Mishnah, exactly as we just said. So if you have a worker and he's harvesting figs, te'enim are figs, so he can't, lean over to the grapes that are in the row next to it, but that he's not harvesting, and eat the grapes. He can't do that. If he's harvesting grapes, so then he shouldn't be, or working with grapes, whatever, let's say harvesting grapes, so then he shouldn't go and eat the figs that are next to it. What he can do is that he can wait to hold off on eating until he gets to a really nice part of the row that is, nice and sunny, and the fruits are really sweet and gishmak. And he can eat there. He can decide, I'm not going to eat here. I'm going to wait till I get to a different part and I'll eat there. Now, when a worker is allowed to eat, it's so long as he's working. He can't stop working and take a break and sit down and eat. No, so long as he's working, he can be eating, but it's it's while he's working, right? Right, while it's threshing. So also a worker while he's working, he can eat, but he doesn't sit down in order to take a break to eat. Now, even though the permission to eat midoraisa is while they're working, but the truth of the matter is, it would actually be beneficial for the balabayis if when they ate was actually between rows, right? They finish harvesting a row and they're moving on to the next row. So when they're walking from one row to the next, if they eat in between, they're technically not working. So technically speaking, it wouldn't be included in what they're, in their permission to eat. But it's the balabais is totally fine with it because if they eat in between rows while they're walking from one to the next, and they're working when they're working and they're not eating when they're working, so that's beneficial for him. So even though technically that isn't covered in what they're allowed to consume while they're working, me'ikar adin, but it's beneficial to the balabais that they eat during the in-between time, so that would be fine. When they're on their way back from the vat, I guess if they're working in the wine vat, and a donkey while it is unloading, the Gemara is going to kind of explain what that is. They asked a kasha. Ose begefen ze maushe yochel begefen acher. You hear the kasha? It's an interesting kasha. The Mishnah had said that if you're harvesting grapes, you can't then go and be eating the figs that are next to it. Because you're harvesting grapes, you can eat grapes. But what if you're harvesting this row of grapes? Can you reach over to the adjacent row of grapes? Row of grapes. Wow, I hope YouTube doesn't blocked this video for that mistake. Anyways, where am I? So, I just totally lost my train of thought. Right. So here's the shaila. You're harvesting this row. Oh gosh, I keep on getting distracted because I have to have my phone here and it just keeps on getting pulled into things. Where am I? So, grapes. Right. Okay. So we said that if you're harvesting grapes, you can't reach over and eat figs. What if you're harvesting this row of grapes? Can you reach over to the adjacent row of grapes and eat from there? Okay. Again, practice Gemara. Ibrahim asked the kasha. If he's working on with this row of grapes, can he reach over to an adjacent row of grapes and eat from that row? Do we say, look, the main thing is that you're allowed to eat from the species that you're working with, right? The species that you put into the vessel of the balabais is what you can eat from. What species are you working with? Grapes. So you can eat grapes. Who cares what row it's from? Or perhaps mima. Or no, is it that you can eat specifically from what you are working with and what you put into the vessel of the balabais, and what you're putting into the vessel of the balabais are these specific grapes, not the other grapes that you're not working with. So it would have to be these grapes, no other grapes. So that's the shaila. Is it about the species? And yes, the next row is the same species, it's the same grapes, right? They're both grapes. But it's a different row, or does it have to be the exact, same thing, the row itself? So that's the shayla. Now, if you want to suggest that it's mima, right? It's not just mimin, but it's also mima. You have to eat from specifically what you're harvesting, that row, not the adjacent one. So if you say that, right? If you say that if you're working with one row of grapes, you can't eat from a different one. Well then, shor b'mechuber heichi achil. Well then, I don't understand how we said that an ox can eat when it's working with things that are already detached from the ground, like threshing. But also if it's harvesting, how does an ox harvest? Well, it just kind of schleps a cart, right? So the harvesters are harvesting the wheat, and then they're dumping it into a cart that's being pulled by the ox. Now the ox is in front of the cart, so the ox is actually eating from wheat that isn't technically being harvested right now. So if that's the case, so if we say that if you're working with these grapes, you can't be eating those grapes, well then how can an ox be allowed to eat what during the harvest? It's going to be eating wheat that is not the wheat that's currently being harvested. So how can the ox eat? So Rav Shisha Ravidi says, well, if you could technically argue that, well, what it's allowed to eat is sort of like an extra long kind of like sheaf or something, so it is actually from the grain that is being harvested right now, and it kind of reaches over to where the ox is. Tashma Kamir. Lo yochal ba'anovim. Okay, so we said that if he's working with figs, he can't eat the adjacent grapes. But if what was adjacent was not, if he's working with figs and what was adjacent was not grapes but figs, the implication would be that he would be able to eat them. Right? So we're saying, right, if he's working with figs, so he can't eat the adjacent grapes. The implication being that he can eat the adjacent figs. So but if you say that if you're working with these grapes, you cannot eat the adjacent grapes, then I don't understand. How do you explain the Mishnah? The Mishnah is saying that if you're working with figs, then you can't eat the adjacent grapes, but you would be able to eat adjacent figs. So Amr of Shisha Brei Rav Idi bimodalis. No, what the Mishnah is talking about, right, when it says that if you're working with figs, you can't eat grapes, it means if they're like one on top of the other. It's like one row that like has like, figs on top of the grapes, but like it's all the same row. It's not adjacent rows. And therefore like, if you're harvesting the figs, right, like you just like lower down your, you can just, while you're harvesting the figs, you can just like lower down your hand and pluck a grape. And the question is, when you're harvesting the figs, can you be eating the grapes? and we're saying, no, you can't. But if it was like figs on top and on bottom, the whole row is all figs, well, then you would be able to eat, all the figs. But in terms of, you can argue that separate rows, though, you wouldn't be able to eat figs from a separate row that you're not harvesting right now. Tashma, come in here. Avamonea es atzmo ad she'agia lemakom hayofos ve'ochel. The Mishnah had said that he could hold himself back and he could say, you know what, I don't want to eat these grapes. If I just wait till we get to the end of the row, those grapes are going to be much more delicious grapes. Let me just wait until I get there. But v'i omart, if you say, ose begefen zeh, ochel begefen acher, but if you say, look, when you're harvesting these grapes, you can already be eating those grapes, well, nezel v'nesi v'nechel. Well, then, why doesn't he just go and get those grapes that are really geschmack, that he isn't harvesting yet, but let him eat them, even though he's not yet harvesting them? So, where am I? So, nezel v'nesi v'nechel. So, hasu mishum bittul malacha lo kami bayalon. So you say, yeah, but the thing is, the issue there, the reason why we're saying there that you can't eat the grapes at the end of the row right now is because, well, to get them, you would have to stop working to go over there and get them. That's the problem. But kikami bayalon, what we're asking about is heicha deika ishto uvanov mai. But what if he has his wife and kids there who aren't being paid to work right now? Would they be able to go over there and get them for him and bring them back? That's what we want to know. So he's not harvesting those grapes right now, but can he eat them? So long as he can get them in a way that would not be bittul malacha. That's what we're trying to figure out. Tashma, come in here. V'chulam lo amru elo b'shas milacha. So we said that they're only allowed to eat these fruits while they're doing the work. Aval, right, which would mean that in between rows, they technically speaking would be unable to eat because they're not working at that point. Aval mipnei hoshev aveda levailim amu pe'alim ochlim ba'alichos me'umen umen v'chazraz menagas. But we say, look, the fact of the matter is, it's actually advantageous to the balabayis if they eat while they're walking in between rows rather than while they're working. So even though technically they're not working while they're in between rows, so therefore technically they're not permitted to eat, they don't have the permission to eat during that point, but the truth is it's advantageous to the balabayis that they eat then rather than while they're working, so therefore they're allowed to. So what we're saying is that midoraisa they wouldn't be able to eat, but because it's actually advantageous to the balabais, we say that they can eat. V'savrua, so savrua mahalech ka'ose ma'asedami. Now we're assuming right now that walking between the rows is basically as though they are working. So we're saying that when they're in between rows, midoraisa they're not allowed to eat, but only because it's advantageous to the balabais. Now the assumption is that when they're walking in between rows, it's osemaisa, it's part of the work that they're doing. We want to assume for now that when they're in between rows, it's actually part of their work. Well then, why would they not be allowed to eat? Well, they're not allowed to eat. We want to assume because you're not allowed to eat from one row to the other, and therefore when they're coming from the previous row with the fruits from the previous row, but they're going to the next row, so it's considered like they're already working on the next row, but they're eating the fruits from the previous row. So midoraisa that is not allowed, but in the interest of the, it's beneficial to the balabais that they eat while they're in between rows. So therefore we say it's taka okay. So therefore alma osa begefen zeh eino ochel begefen acher. So therefore that would prove that when you're working on one row, you're not allowed to eat from another row, and only midrabanan we say it's beneficial to the balabais, you can eat. So no, the olam emelach, really I'll say to you, osa begefen zeh ochel begefen acher, that no, really I'll say to you that if you're working on one row, you can eat from the grapes, the same grape, if you're working on one row of grapes, you can eat from the grapes on the other row. Umahalech lav ka osa maisedami. But the thing is that when you're in between rows, it's not considered like you're working, and that's why you're technically not allowed to eat, but because it's advantageous to the Baal Bais, you can. Those who flip it around. So let's start from the starting point that Mahalik Lav Kosa Maisidami, that walking in between from one row to the next is not considered like you are doing something. Ve'hainu taima, and there dimidoraisa lo achil. And the reason why midoraisa you can't eat is mishum de lav ke'ose maisedami, is because it's not considered like you're actually working right now. But ose maise achil, but so long as achil midoraisa, but so long as you are working, you would be able to eat from one row to the next. Ama ose begefen zeh ochel begefen acher. Lo, we say no. Really, I'll say that when you're working in one, you're not allowed to eat from the other. And we're saying that when you're walking in between, it is like you're doing a maiseh. But the reason why midoraisa they're not allowed to eat is because you're not allowed to eat from one row to the next. But midorabanan we say it's advantageous to the palabais, so therefore they're allowed to eat. So it seems like we can't necessarily prove one way or the other so clearly. And we said that a donkey, when it is unloading, but when it is unloading, how's it going to eat? You unload it very quickly, right? The donkey shows up, you take the stuff off, it's gone. How's it going to eat? So until it unloads. I don't exactly know how it's going to eat until it unloads. What can it like lean over and eat somehow, or maybe you could like throw it in front of it? I'm not exactly sure. Tanina la Tana Rabbanan, we have a Mishnah. So this is a Mishnah for that which we learned in a Brisa. Chomer v'gamel, a donkey and a camel. Ochlim imasoi shal gabein. They can eat from the what they're schlepping. As long as you don't feed it to them with their hands. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means that like dafka take it and like let them eat it out of your hand, because then they're going to eat a lot, or if it means like you can. How else would they eat it if it's on their back? Maybe you would like take someone like throw it in front of him. They would eat it like that maybe. All right, Cheved, there's a lot of interesting stuff in Daf Tzadi Aleph of Masechta BavaMetzia. We learned about lav shein bo ma'aseh, loken alav or not. Right, we learned about the machlokes in Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish about is dibur, is speech considered like a maaseh or not, and we learned about that if you're renting an ox and you muzzle the animal, so then you're going to be chayav makis, but also you have to pay. We saw through machlokas. Abaye said that's Taka Reb Meir, who says loka u'mashalim. Ravad said that even in a scenario where you wouldn't have to pay because you get makis, but you'd still have a debt, and you'd have a chiyuv, lotzei sidei shemaim. And Rav Papa had said that taka the chiyuv makis and the chiyuv of mammon come at different times. Then we add these other. We talked about bread being baked, dairy bread. We talked about kilayim, and we got sort of into details over there. And then we got to if you're working with this. If with grapes, you're not allowed to eat figs and vice versa. And then we got into the whole question about what about from one row to the next. It wasn't super clear. Peace out.